talk to you about civilizational war. Muhammad was the greatest warrior who ever lived. Today, no one dies because of Caesar, Napoleon, or Alexander the Great. But someone died today because of Muhammad. He was able to take and make all aspects of life a weapon of war. And since Islam is a complete way of life, an entire civilization, there are a lot of weapons. Let me show you two differences between us and Islamic society. Our civilization is based on the ethical cornerstone of do unto others as you would have them do unto you, called the Golden Rule. I call it the unitary ethic. Islam is a dualistic ethical system. How you're treated depends on who you are. There are 7 verses in the Quran which state that a Muslim is not the friend of a kafir. Another way that we differ is this. Our intellectual system is based on critical thought, fact-based reasoning. Islamic civilization is based on authoritative reasoning. Nothing is allowed to violate what is found in the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith. Here's how clothing can be made a weapon of war. In Macedonia, for instance, if you convert to Islam and you'll wear a hijab, you'll get a monthly salary. And in America, we find that some demands are made that hijabs be worn even if you're a salesperson and no one else wears one. So the hijab can be made a weapon of war, civilizational war. If you buy a hot dog on the streets in New York, you'll buy a halal hot dog. Why? Because all hot dogs are halal. Now, how did this come about? Well, I'm not sure, but I do know that it's true. Marshmallows can be a weapon of war. My daughter has a child in school who came home with a note, and the note said, "Do not bring gummy bears, a chewy candy, and marshmallows to school." And my daughter said, "Why is this?" So she asked within the school system and discovered that Muslims had come in and said, "Gummy bears and marshmallows have pork in them in gelatin form, and we don't want our children to eat them, so we don't want them in the schools at all." So marshmallows became a weapon of civilizational war. They're shot out of the schools. Now, we like to say that Jewish law says that Jews don't eat pork, but Sharia law says no one eats pork. We see this in our prisons. Once you have enough Muslim prisoners, they demand halal food. Then, after halal food is given to the Muslim prisoners, the next demand is the whole prison eats halal food. We find this in schools. If there's a lot of Muslim students in the schools, and they don't want to eat our food but want to eat halal food, then once it's fixed in a few schools, the demand is made for the entire school system to serve halal food. Then we have finances. Sharia finance includes the zakat, and the zakat is a tax, and that tax money can be used for jihad. If we're talking about jihad, let's talk about the different kinds of jihad. And by the way, jihad is not war. Jihad just means struggle or effort. Now, when you think of jihad, you probably think of jihad of the sword, because it's the violent jihad. But that, oddly enough, is the least dangerous form of jihad. More dangerous than jihad of the sword is jihad of speech and pen. For instance, the Muslim Brotherhood took and created a word called Islamophobe, which implies you're crazy if you don't like Islam. Now, when I heard this, I thought, well, that'll never go anywhere. But it's gone all over the world. And now then, it shuts us up. Well, it doesn't shut me up, but it shuts many people up. And then they call you a racist, hater, bigot, Islamophobe. And being threatened with being told that, a lot of people just say, well, I won't talk about Islam at all because I don't want to be a bigot or seen as a bigot. Now let's talk about the jihad of money. I sat in a mosque in Southern California and watched out of a group of about 50 people, maybe no more than 40. They raised $18,000 for the purpose of lawfare. Now lawfare is using an attorney to sue me over some issue, and then at the very end dropping the whole case after I've spent my own time and money. They were clear what it was to be used for. Now, the Quran is filled with exhortations to do this. In the United States now, as well as in other places around the world, Muslims are running for office. In Nashville, Tennessee, we have elected our first councilwoman who's a Muslim. And who voted for her? Well, of course, all the Muslims did. And by the way, they vote nearly 99% of them. But the other people who voted for her were the people who wanted to be tolerant, because tolerance is such a virtue, and here was a chance to exercise your tolerance by voting for a Muslim. Then there's jihad of complaints. If you bring Muslims into your workplace, you will soon find they have something to complain about and something they want changed. Now let's talk about love jihad. This term was introduced to me by my Hindu friends. Love jihad is a Muslim male marrying a woman who's Hindu, Jewish, or Christian. Now, what difference does this make? Well, if she's a Christian, as an example, the Christian womb is now producing Muslim children because it is the rule of Sharia that the children are all raised as Muslims. So this is love jihad. Then, of course, there's the hijra, immigration. Immigration is flooding the United States and Europe, and this is a form of jihad because it is a replacement method. Our citizens are being replaced with those who want Sharia law. Now let's look further at our enemies, because we have two of them. We have Islam as the far enemy, their civilization, and then we have the near enemy, the apologist. Now let me state here, I've never been harmed by a Muslim or Islam, but I have been harmed by apologists. Notice that I don't say left or right, but apologist. You can be an apologist for Islam and be a conservative Christian. You can be an apologist for Islam and be a leftist. That's all that matters to me, is that you support Islam. What you do left or right is no consequence. Now, apologists do Islam's bidding in actual work, but in the end, Islam will destroy both the left and the right. Let me give you an example. The Tudor Party was the Communist Party in Iran, and they overthrew the Shah and brought in Khomeini, a Muslim. Now, you would think that they would be seen as best allies because they brought him to power. 5 days after he went to power, he had death warrants issued for all the Tudor Party members. Now then, here's some of the ways that apologists harm us. And these aren't Muslims. Their stated policy is to drive haters out of business. And we see this in my life. They demonetized my YouTube channel. Last week, PayPal threw me off their books. Why did they do this? I don't know. They said it was terms and conditions, but who knows what that means. But they know that I stand against Islam, and that's all they need. We find that textbooks have been published by apologists that tell us that Islam is the highest civilization that's ever existed. In the 7th grade here in Tennessee, you will learn that Islam gives women their rights, and that they were the first to give women their rights. That they protect Christians and Jews. That the high point of human civilization has been the Golden Age in Baghdad and Spain. Now, none of these things are true, so they harm our civilization, but they're not said by Muslims. These are said by Kafirs, non-Muslims. Mainstream media. Well, the mainstream media doesn't report much about immigration or jihad. I've just gotten to where I presume if there's some dastardly deed that's done, for instance, in the streets of London, if there's no mention of the name or there's no picture, whether it's true or not, I just presume it's a jihadi, because they support the jihadis by covering up their work as much as possible. Do I need to present the case that social media is pro-Islam and an apologist? How many people have been thrown off of Facebook by telling the truth about Islam? I've been shadow banned on Twitter, thrown off of Facebook in Germany. And it used to be if you search for political Islam, which is a term, by the way, that I created, if you did it on Google, the first 3 full screens were all about my work. Well, that's gone now, 2/3 of it. Why? Don't know, it just disappeared. Now here's something else we need to talk about. Muhammad not only invented civilizational war, he invented something called eternal war. Previous warriors have exerted themselves through long war, but Muhammad created a war that never ends as long as there's any kafir left on the face of the earth. Losing doesn't matter under this concept because it's generational. Let me give you an example. Islam invaded Spain in the year 711, and 7 centuries later, 1492, they were driven out. You would think that would be a permanent loss. That loss is being compensated for today by Muslims immigrating into Spain. They plan on taking over Spain in this time. They want to keep it. In the Balkans, where Islam was driven out, they're back today. And if you drive along the roads in Macedonia, it seems about every 20 miles is a new Ottoman mosque, that is, a Turkish mosque. You see, the advantage here is that Muslims keep time with a calendar and we keep time with a watch. They're willing to wait forever. Here's an example of waiting forever. The Bulgarians made a movie about the conquest of Bulgaria by the Ottoman Muslims. In it, a Christian is converted to Islam under force. And he says to his Muslim friend, he says, "I don't believe this stuff at all." And the Muslim replied, "That doesn't make any difference, because you will raise your children as Muslim, then they will raise their children as Muslims, and in the 3rd generation they will be raised as Muslims, and they won't even know you ever existed. So who you are, what you do, doesn't matter." Here's another example. The Sufi Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was the mastermind of 9/11, September 11th World Trade Tower attack, said this: "We will win because Americans don't realize we do not need to defeat you militarily. We only need to fight you long enough for you to defeat yourself by quitting." Let's learn a lesson from this. Don't quit the fight. Eternal war gives you a great morale, so you can be very creative in your thinking. Here's the way this is done. After September 11, 2001, the attack on the World Trade Towers, church phones began to ring and a voice on the other end of the line said, "Hi, I'm such and such, a Muslim, and we would like to come to your church and present a talk on Islam, the religion of peace." My point is this: what other group could take a PR disaster like the World Trade Tower attacks and turn it around in 3 days' time in a national program to be an asset? Because what they said was, we're the real victims of 9/11. So they have good morale because they're going to win. It doesn't matter whether they win now or not, they'll win later. Now if you have poor morale, you have dreadful creativity. Your creativity is destroyed by depression. We're way quick to say, Sweden is lost, France is lost. This drives me nuts. I hear this and I want to scream because this is the talk of losers. This is the talk of bad morale. And if you have bad morale, you can't win. If you have good morale and a will to win, you'll create a new way of fighting in which you do win. So morale is incredibly important. As a matter of fact, I like to say that if you don't have good morale, there's no sense in a warrior putting on his Kevlar. Now let's look at our situation today. We have some assets here. For the first time in human history, it is possible for the average person to understand the doctrine of Islam. It used to be that this knowledge was only held by experts, Arab languages specialists, Middle East historians, theologians, but today a bus driver and a plumber can understand the doctrine of Islam. This means that we can use this as a weapon in an ideological war. Here's the deal. Kafirs know facts, apologists know opinions, apologists know experts, and we know Allah and Muhammad. Now this is very important, because if I'm discussing Islam with someone, be they Kafir or Muslim, and they say something that I know is wrong, I can say Muhammad says or Allah says. No matter what expert you are, even if you're head of the Department of Islamic Studies at Al-Azhar University, if you contradict what Allah says or Muhammad did, you're wrong. So we now have a weapon whereby we can engage people in argument and debate and win every time if we know Allah and Muhammad. I like to say that I'm a student of Dr. Allah and Professor Muhammad, and I win my arguments. So this means that you can too. Now here's an example of fighting and not knowing your ideology. We have been in Afghanistan for 18 years, and we're no closer to winning now than we were when we started. As a matter of fact, we're further away from winning than when we started. I read a strategic paper written by the top general in Afghanistan. 3 words did not occur in this paper: Islam, Muslims, and jihad. And here's a man saying he can beat whoever his enemy is because he doesn't name the enemy. He's going to beat him. He's not going to beat him. You're not going to beat anybody if you don't know your enemy and how they think. Now you would think that the CIA, which is an intelligence organization, or the FBI, would know a lot about Islam. I have friends who have retired from the CIA and the FBI, and they tell me consistently they know nothing about Islam. As a matter of fact, one friend of mine, a retired agent, talking to a young FBI agent about the nature of Islam and its ideology, and the man actually said, "I don't want to hear this. This knowledge would only get me in trouble back at the agency." Think you can ask a Christian clergyman and learn something about Islam? He knows nothing about the Islamic doctrine of Christians. He doesn't know how to refute the arguments, so he's a loser too. Christians and clergy ignore the destruction of Christians in Africa and the Middle East and don't seem to have a clue that it's demanded by the doctrine of Islam. Now, for the first time, we can fight an ideological war. In the past, it's always been a sword, and this has not worked. Apologists censor us. Why? Because they're our real enemy. Because they cannot win an argument. So they say, take him off the stage. Now, what's tragic about this is we're losing the very legacy of our critical thought and debate. Our civilization is based on rational thought, and we are abandoning our heritage. This is a disaster. It's a form of suicide. We're losing the ability to have civil discourse. We deal with insults, not reasoning. And by the way, never stoop to name calling and insults. It's simply childish to do. You don't have to, and you don't have to, so don't do it. Now, Muslims are entering all aspects of our country. We're having an elected official. They sit on boards and councils. We must use every political meeting to Islamicize it. They want to take our stage away. Let's go to their stage and declare ideological war. We need to ask all candidates and create an issue of Islam, even if they're a kafir and they're not running on anything that relates to Islam at all. But we need to Islamicize this. We need to take advantage of this and grab the stage back, which they're trying to remove us from on Facebook and other such places. It's easy to politicize a political gathering. Print up some brochures and hand them out to the audience. You'll see how it works. Here's a technique for asking questions. Pick the worst aspect of Islam. I'm going to choose child marriage and wife beating, and ask the person, will you reject and condemn wife beating and child marriage as is found in the Sharia and the Quran? Now, if the kafir says, well, that's not found there, which they don't know, but they'll just deny it anyway because of the question, repeat it this way. If child marriage and wife beating were in the Quran and the Sharia, would you condemn it if it were there? See what they do with that. Now, if they're a Muslim, they simply can't condemn what's in the Quran. That would be blasphemy. So they will say, oh, that's not in there. So ask the Muslim the same question. Well, if child marriage and wife beating were in the Quran, would you condemn it? Put them on the spot. Make them answer the question yes or no. We need to run candidates who oppose Sharia. Lots of candidates in all levels of office. Whether you get elected doesn't matter that much. I had a man visit me yesterday who plans to run for office in his county, a rural county, and he's doing so not for the purpose of winning, but for the purpose of discussing Islam. They cannot take that platform away from him. Let's get some things straight. We're involved in a civilizational war, and we have a better civilization. Our civilization is capable of correcting itself. We have to win, because our civilization is precious. So we need to fight against the apologists, not the Muslims. It is much easier to deal with an apologist who's usually a clergyman or a professor or somebody else instead of Muslims because we're less fearful. It's easy to talk to them. So we have to declare war against the apologists, not by being mean to them, but educating them. It's an ideological war. Remember this, courage is not the lack of fear. Courage is the act of doing something in the face of fear, and it is time for us to become courageous. This is not some drill. This is not some exercise. This is fighting for the very existence of our civilization. It is a precious, beautiful, and wonderful civilization that is capable of correcting its errors. And we need to preserve it, and we need your efforts and the efforts of every other kafir. Get out there and fight. Thank you.
Yes, hello, Dr. Warner. I'm Charles. Can you explain the Quranic Hadith basis for sanctioned deception in Islam? How the three or four different types of lying and deception can be used and against infidels and kafir?
There are 89 verses in the Quran which state that a Muslim is to imitate Muhammad in everything he said or did. This perfect example is called Sunnah. So it turns out, although most people think of Islamic doctrine coming from the Quran, the most of it comes from Muhammad. As a matter of fact, if you count up all the Quran, the Surah, the Hadith, and you'll find out that only 14% of the doctrine is about Allah. 86% of the doctrine is about Muhammad. All right. I'm going to give you a rough quote, Hadith, Bukhari. Who will kill Ashraf, the friend of Allah and his Prophet? I will, Muhammad, but I will need to deceive him. May I do so? Yes, deceive him. So here we have Muhammad telling one of his followers in the mosque, he can kill somebody and use deception. So therefore this is the Sunnah of Muhammad, which means that Muslims can use deceit in order to fool the kafir. Now, there's another thing about in the Quran that affirms this. In one of the verses about the Jews, Allah says that the Jews think they're deceiving me. I am the greatest deceiver. So here we have in the Quran, we have the image of Allah, the God of the universe, being a deceiver. So, Now, there's also another aspect. Reliance of the traveler, you discover rules work like this. If a goal can be accomplished without telling a lie, the goal here is to advance Islam. If you can advance Islam without telling a lie, then that is your duty to do so. But if you need to use deception to push the cause of Islam, you may do that as well. So we see here we have a formal doctrine of deceit. I think it's interesting that Allah claims that He's the greatest of deceivers. So deception is indeed part of Islam. I've seen it happen many times. Muslim will deny that, for instance, a Muslim might sit here and deny that even in such a hadith, the deception of kill someone. So anyway, yes, we can deceive as long as it advances Islam and as long as the truth won't get the job done. Now, the problem here is manyfold. Once it's okay to deceive somebody to advance Islam, it also it's a subtle shift that you can make where you deceive others in order to benefit yourself only. So this means that in business, it's possible for a person to say, well, I can deceive you because deception is okay.
Mr. Warner, I'm Kent. But just wanted to ask you a question about interfaith dialogues.
Oh, interfaith, okay, got
Yes.
it. Interfaith dialogue.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
I have been to several, and how effective can one be if you have knowledge of Islam to be in those settings and then share your knowledge with those in the audience of what you know, and you can be an effective witness there at those dialogues?
First off, interfaith dialogue is a bridge to nowhere. Let me give you an example of interfaith dialogue that we went to soon after 9/11. A Jew who was a rabbi, I think it was a Baptist minister, and a Sunni imam were at a bridge building, interfaith gathering. My wife asked the following question. She said to the Baptist minister, says, have you read the Quran? He said, no, I have not. She asked the rabbi, she says, have you read the Quran? He says, no, I have not. She asked the rabbi, the imam, she said, have you read the New Testament? He says, oh yes, I've taken several courses in it. Then she said, have you read the Old Testament? He said, yes, I've had several courses in it. Now, who came prepared? Well, the only person who came prepared is the winner. Because you see at these interfaith dialogue with the Jews and the Christians is they're there to tie, whereas the Muslims are there to win. So it drives me nuts to see people go out and participate in interfaith dialogue with nothing more than compassion, love, and caring, but they don't have any facts at their disposal. I would pay money to go to an interfaith dialogue in which the people at the front of the room knew what they were talking about. I'm talking about the Christians and the Jews. But I've never seen that happen, nor have I ever even heard of it happen. So we have goodwill versus desire to win. So that's the problem with bridge building. The Qutb said we need to build a bridge from Islam to the Kafirs, but not for the purpose of us crossing the bridge to them, but for them to cross the bridge to us. And so there we have interfaith dialogue is actually, it would be great if those who attended it had something to give other than feeling good and wanting to be nice. So that's kind of my comment there. If you're in the audience, you can only ask questions. And the kind of question you want to ask is about Islamic doctrine, not about what Muslims do or even history. So that's a brief answer to the question. If you have more I need to talk to you about, let me know.
In your recent trips to Europe, what are some things that encourage you that you've seen happening, and what are some things that have discouraged you that you see happening in Europe right now? And do you have any comments on what's happening in Paris and Sweden and England generally, all across the European continent?
I divide Europe into two parts, Central Europe and Western Europe. Now, I've studied a lot of European history, but my history that I studied was always about Britain, France, Germany, and not Central Europe. So, but where I go to is Central Europe because that's where I have an organization there called the Center for the Study of Political Islam. Central Europe is aware of what's going on. They're the most intelligent. When I first went over there, one of the things that I noticed that my audience was young. all were under the age of 40. In America, when I speak, the audience is usually old. There's a lot of white hair in the room. So I said to them, I said, why are you so this was on my very first visit. I says, why is there so much will to oppose Islam here in Central Europe? And the guy who invited me over said, that's simple. We were behind the Iron Curtain. We were in Czech Republic at the time. And he said, we have seen tyranny without a God. He says Islam is here and they have tyranny with a God, and we figure that tyranny with a God is even worse than tyranny from an atheist. So he said we have a big concern about that. He pointed to another person across the room. He says, see that man? The KGB, this man was Czech, killed his uncle. So he says, we have seen the worst of tyranny and we don't want it again. So, as a result, I have an active organization with representatives in Poland, Slovakia, Czech Republic, even starting out in Bulgaria and Lithuania and Hungary. So all the people who work with me are from Central Europe. Now, what is exciting to me is when I first started in this business, I thought that I could publish books which would explain the doctrine of Islam and that people would run to get the information and use it. But what I discovered is, in general, people ran okay, but it was in the opposite direction. People did not want to know what I know. So what I thought was people would read my books and then they would do something. But I've discovered that this is not what happens. People read my books and start to worry, but they don't actually do anything because they need somebody to work with. So what we're doing is we're going to bring the Central for the Study of Political Islam from Central Europe to America this year. I'm very excited about it because we have operations manuals, we have training systems to go through, leadership trainings. Because what we want to do is we want to bring the Center for the Study of Political Islam to the United States so that we can do what they're doing in Europe. So I'm excited about that and looking forward to it, actually, because we have to have someone to work with. We have a military, not a military, well, it's almost military. Muslim Brotherhood works in groups. Muslims don't think of working alone. So we have to bring people together so they can have projects to work on, people to work on it with. We need to form our own teams and groups, so that's what we're going to try to do. We have an education process, we have a leadership process, and we also have a way in which we do things. And one of the ways we do things is we do not discuss Muslims. We only discuss Islam. So that's what's happening this year in the United States, and we have weekly meetings now in order to do this. What happened is that 6 years ago, a man called me up and said, I created the concept. Remember Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come? So what I did was I created the concept of the Center for the Study of Political Islam, and he called me and he said, could we establish the Center for the Study of Political Islam in Central Europe? And I said, sure. I didn't think anything would happen, quite frankly. It's too big a job. But it turned out the man, Milan is his name, was an organizational genius. He was 26 years old when he called me. And he's put together this entire operation. It's very formal, very Germanic, if I must say. But anyway, so we're going to bring this to the United States so that people such as yourself will have methods to work with, and people to work with, and projects to work on.
Good evening, Dr. Warner. It's great to have you here with us tonight. I'm Bev Snow, and I've been working with Wes pretty close to 2 years now in bringing people in to educate our community. And we've done a great job of educating. But my question to you is, what do I do next? Because I can keep bringing people in and educating, but I feel like I'm hitting a wall where Minnesota, I keep hearing it's lost, that Minnesota is lost. I'm not ready to accept that. And I want to take a step forward to do a better job, not just educating, but making change. Thank you.
You're asking the same question, what can we do? This is the idea I was talking about, in which we want to create groups, but they have projects to work on, and so that project can be very simple, by the way. Let me give you an example of a project that's done in California that's excellent. Steve Amundsen, every Friday, goes to the mall in Southern California and sets up a small card table and hands out brochures, roughly 1,500 brochures on a Friday night. These brochures are all about Islam, the true nature of Islam. He's been doing this now for 2 years, I think. This is an example of what I call a project. That is, it's not just an idea, but people show up somewhere that work with other businesses. He has about 4 people in his team that he works with. So we need to create simple projects, and you're right, education by itself is not enough. This is the idea of this bringing CSPI from Europe over here is so that we will have a ready-made question. We're going to create a website in which there are projects that you can work on. Meet with people that say that you like the idea of handing out brochures. You'll be able to talk with somebody like Steve Amundsen, who's a professional at it, get guidance from him. So I'm afraid that my answer to you is you'll have to wait for better answers on projects to work on. I would encourage you to keep on educating people because the first step towards doing anything is you have to know what you're talking about. But we do need teams so that we can work with, and we need projects that we can work on that are proven projects. Come back to me in 6 months' time and I'll have a better answer for you.
Great, thank you.
What can be done to reach Muslims, to call them away from their ideology?
Great question. In my house it was summertime, I had a man visit me. He's a Baptist minister in Australia, Keith Piper. Keith Piper has personally converted 2,400 Muslims. Let that sink in. By himself, he has done that. There's another man who's converted hundreds to Christ. He uses, the first man, Keith Piper, what he does, both men do the same thing. They teach Muslims what Islam really is. You think that you know Islam, but you know more about Islam probably than Muslims do. I've never met Muslims who knew much about Islam. By that I mean much about the Quran and Muhammad. So what Keith Piper does is he sits down and for 2 hours he sits there with a person and he asks them questions. He doesn't tell them anything. And then when they can't answer the questions he gives them, he helps them to find the answer in the Quran. So, for instance, one thing he says, according to Islam, where does the sun go at night? Well, it turns out the Quran has an answer for this. The sun goes down into a muddy pond. That's right, a muddy pond. And then in the morning it rises up. Well, the Muslim he asked this question of doesn't know that the Quran even addresses this question. So, when he has the Muslim read the Quran verse itself and write that down. So what he consistently does is he asks questions about Islam and he doesn't give them the answer, he lets them find the answer. Well, if you're a Muslim today in the 21st century, it's embarrassing to think that the sun sinks into a muddy pond at nighttime. Because the answer to the question is, the sun doesn't go anywhere. So here we have a law saying that the sun goes down into a muddy pond. Well, who believes that? No one. So he plants the seeds of doubt. He plants seeds of doubt, questions, until finally they're like, this is ridiculous. The whole thing is ridiculous. So the way you convert Muslims to Islam, away from Islam, is you teach them what Islam is. Now once you've got them dissatisfied with what the religion is, then and only then do you bring up the gospel of Jesus. Here's the reason presenting Muslims with the gospels and Jesus doesn't work. Now it may work a little bit, but it really doesn't work very well. The reason that when you talk about Jesus, first off, you don't believe he is they've been told who Jesus is. The Quran defines Jesus. It is not the Jesus of the Gospels. Mm-hmm. If you want to talk to them about the Gospels, they've already been told about the Quran that the Gospels are corrupt. So when you try to teach a Muslim, when you try to preach to them about the Gospels of Jesus, what goes on in their mind is, I already know all this stuff, and your Gospels are corrupt. So you teach them what Islam is, then you teach them what Christianity really is. But first you have to destroy the belief in that they know Jesus and the Gospels. That's a great question. By the way, I do not know of anything other than these 2 men who are doing this work. What I would like to do this summer when we bring CSPI to America is to get them to give a seminar that we could put on video as to how to go about doing that. because the method is very powerful.
Do you have a list of such appropriate questions published somewhere on YouTube or on your website?
I can put you in touch with Keith Piper yourself. So my email is bw@politicalislam.com. Send me an email and give me your question, and I will put you in direct connection with Keith Piper. He's a fabulous person. And by the way, when he got through showing me his method, I said, "Now, how long did you sell financial instruments?" He said, "Well, that was my business before I became an minister." Because his method of doing this reminds me of people who try to explain to you why you should invest your money in certain places. So send me an email and I'll get you in touch with him and he'll tell you all of his secrets.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much for spending your time with us. My question is, I have invited my state senator and Minnesota State House representative many times, had many emails back and forth and conversations, and they are absolutely afraid of touching anything that has to do with Islam. Why are and I found this throughout, I'm a Republican, throughout the Republican Party, no official wants to even talk about it. And we know where the Democrats are. Why are both political parties really in bed with Islam now and nobody's speaking up?
People are afraid. Now, when I first started being in this business, people asked me, "Aren't you afraid?" And I was like, "No." What they meant was, "Aren't you afraid of being killed?" Now then, they're not afraid of being killed. They're afraid of happening to them what happens to me. The Southern Poverty Law Center says that I'm one of the biggest racist, hater, biggest Islamophobes in America. Now, these things are just words. But I have discovered, I am amazed at how many people will simply grovel and shut their mouth as long as if you say, "I won't call you a bad name if you just be quiet." I personally was introduced to one of the Republican committees, Republican Party in Davidson County, guy who was in the leadership capacity of it, and he could not wait for me to leave the room. He did not, you could tell he was hoping no recording was made because he did not want to ever let it be known that he knew me. He was terrified. He was terrified because if he knows something about Islam and says something about it, then he is an Islamophobe. I'm not sure how to deal with such people. But I think that one of the things we need to get them to do is to admit that they're afraid. I also think this, that sometimes the best way to approach about Islam is not through the doctrine, Quran, Surah, Hadith, Muhammad and Allah, but the history of Islam. If the person you're dealing with is a Christian, a question you can ask them is, do you know the history of how 60 million Christians died under Islam? Because Christians are supposed to care for the persecuted church. So at least they're supposed to do something even if they don't do anything. So these are some ideas I've had on this, and I do not have all the answers, but I think that it is the most important question to ask of the night. We have to find some way. And by the way, these people can be very powerful or very wealthy, but the idea of dealing with Islam is like they shrink up, they shrivel up. And what they try to do is to seek some compromise. And the compromise is if we're ignorant, then we won't know anything, so we won't worry about it if we don't know it. I don't have a good answer for you. If I had an answer to that, it'd be winners all around.
Hi. My question is, first, Republicans and Democrats right now are afraid to speak about it. But how are the Democrats, I've seen too many movies, how are they reassured that when Islam in 10 years takes over, that the Islams are going to protect them? Because if they ever take over, they're just they're not gonna protect anybody. So how come the Democrats are brainwashed that they're going to be protected because they're letting them in now, but once they get here, are they going to protect them? Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. The left thinks that they can be buddies with the Muslims. Look, the left, I'm talking about the left now, not the Democratic Party, although it's becoming increasingly a left-wing organization. They think that if they're buddy-buddy with the Muslims, that when the Muslims reach power, that they'll be taken along with them. It is not generally known, but in Iran, which became an Islamic republic, it was not Muslims who brought them to power. It was the Communist Party, the Tudor Party, who brought Khomeini in from France. 5 days after Khomeini came to power, he issued death threats for all the members of the Tudor Party. So the left is very wrong with this. They think they could bring down America with the help of the Muslims and then they'll create their utopia. That is not what's going to happen. But on the other hand, when you try to tell Democrats this, I don't think they want to know about it. People are desperately ignorant about the subject of Islam. If ignorance is bliss, these people are well blistered, I'll tell you that. And I'm not sure that the argument that they will be the first to go means a lot to them. I'm not sure it means a lot to them. You're asking a difficult question that I don't have a good answer to. But I have learned one thing. If you don't know the answer, tell me you don't know. Next question.
You're just a few states away from us. What do you hear about what's going on in Minnesota where you live? Does anything that we're living through here with Islam break out of Minnesota into the national press at all? Do you hear what we're going through?
Most people consider Minnesota the Sweden of America. Here's the problem. The Muslims in America now are a very small body. We have plenty of time, if we use our time, in order to deal with this problem. But the real problem is not the Muslims. The real problem is what I call the apologists for Islam. That is, let me give you an example. In Tennessee, there's a textbook that's being used that teaches you in the 7th grade that Islam was the greatest civilization that's ever been. Islam was the first to give women their rights. Muhammad wrote the first constitution, and on and on and on. None of this is true. But it is not Muslims selling the textbook. It is an organization of non-Muslims who are selling the textbook. Muslims didn't write what was in there. It was done by apologists. By the way, apologists found just as well in the Republican Party and in the Christian community. Let me give you an example. Our current governor, Bill Lee, ran on his platform was basically this: I'm a businessman and how to run a business. I am not a politician, I am a Christian. So Bill Lee, the Christian, has prayed about it and has decided that he wants to increase Muslim immigration to Tennessee by 46%. Is he a Muslim? No. Is he harming us? Yes. So the point I'm making here is that the apologists for Islam, whether they're in textbooks or the government of the state, are far more harmful to us than the Muslims are. Now, the only piece of good news about this is this. Most people have a physical fear of Muslims, but are you afraid of a textbook company? Are you afraid of a man who's a pious governor? You shouldn't be. So we have ways here, we have people we can work with. But we are finding that our biggest enemy are the apologists for Islam, not the Muslims themselves. Who does the dirty work? Muslims don't do any of the dirty work that we find here. Here's an example. A Muslim woman ran in the Nashville City Council in the at-large seat. She got the second most votes of anybody who ran. Who voted for her? Muslims? Well, of course they did, but they're not a very large percentage of our population. Christians, Jews, and liberals were the ones who elected her. And they were proud of it. So we see here again, that coming back to the point, is the Muslim who ran for office the problem? No, the problem is those Christians and those good people want to be nice. So that's the problem. And the apologists, not the Muslims. And like I say, there's good news in that because at least you're not afraid of the government or some other politician.
Can you make a comment on the differences between the evidences that exist for early Christianity versus the evidences that exist for early Islam?
Archaeology is kind to the Old Testament and even the New Testament. Archaeology is cruel to Muslims. Nothing that they set forth as to how they began can be proven historically. For instance, we now know that Mecca, the center of the universe for Islam, was not even used as a religious city till about 200 years after Muhammad died. A brilliant scholar by the name of Dan Gibson studied a lot of old mosques. And one of the ways he was able to do that was Google Earth. Anyway, he was able to show that for the first 200 years, the city that people prayed towards was in Syria. And when we come to the idea of Muhammad's life, that was not written down to nearly 150 years after he died. So Mecca didn't even exist as a city. And the official record of Muhammad, imagine it was like we wanted today to write a biography of George Washington, but we had never had one written before. But all we had were folk tales about who George Washington was. So when we talk about him, how much could we really know that it's factually based? Here's another example of how archaeology is cruel to Islam, but kind to particularly the Old Testament. When they're greatly expanding the city of Mecca, the same man who wrote the book about the direction of prayer talked with some contractors, and he said, how much ancient material are you digging up as you're digging these foundations? The answer was none. When you go to Jerusalem or Rome and you start digging, you can't lay a sewer line without finding old parts of the city. Here we have Mecca. When they're doing excavation work, they find no evidence whatsoever at all of an ancient city being there. Again, I say to you, archaeology is very cruel to Islam.
Dr. Warner, I'm looking and thinking about our educational system here in Minnesota. As we all know, government has a lot to do with the decisions that are made on how our children are going to be educated. Here in Minnesota, they are spending a lot of time bringing in the Quran, allowing the Islams to have their prayer breaks, and yet the children of Christian homes can be punished for bringing a Bible to school. My own granddaughter got in trouble because she forgot on Sunday night to take her Bible out of her purse, and a young Islam seen that Bible in her purse at lunchtime, and she got in trouble, and it was a pretty nasty mark on her class. Now, knowing that, those kids are all grown up, but I have great-grandchildren, and I have one who's going to go to kindergarten not too long from now. And they're going to start teaching him this. We're strong Christians. We teach him Christianity. We bring him to church when we have him. But how do we stop the government from allowing one supposed faith to be taught in the school, but the Christian faith is completely ignored? How do we handle that?
Well, it's a political issue, and I think that it only can have a political answer. By the way, I am all for teaching the Quran and Muhammad in the schools. As a matter of fact, I think it is the only solution to Islam. But when I say to teach about in the schools, I mean teach Islam from the standpoint of the kafir. If you want to teach Islam from the standpoint of the Muslim, fine, but we also have to teach it from the standpoint of the non-Muslim. And so we need to make this a political issue. Why can't we study that is, I want the study of more Quran, and the study of more Muhammad, and the study of more Sharia. Because once you discover that, for instance, the Quran lets you beat your wife, and the Sharia tells you how to do it, this is not something that people respond to well. So we have to go about this in terms of we need more Islam, not less Islam. But we need Islam taught from our standpoint. We need, for instance, to deal with the fact that Islam murdered 60 million Christians, 80 million Hindus, 120 million Africans, and 10 million Buddhists. We need to study that part of Islam as well. We need to study the real history of the Crusades. So I say that we need a lot more of Islam, not less of it. But we need to have it from our viewpoint. There are several viewpoints in dealing with Islam. There's the viewpoint of the Muslim, the viewpoint of the kafir, the non-Muslim, and then there's the viewpoint of the apologist. In one day's time, Muhammad had 800 Jews executed. Now, from the kafir standpoint, that was a war crime. But from the apologist standpoint, they say, well, that was then, this is now, everybody's done bad stuff, let's not talk about it. And the Muslims, of course, don't want to talk about it either. So we have to talk more about Islam, not less, but it has to come back from our point of view. Oh, by the way, if you teach it that way, you can't say you're Islamophobe. You just say, no, I want to know all of Islam, not just half of Islam. And that maybe is our political marching song. We want all of Islam, not half of it.
In partial response to Bev's question, shouldn't we be employing some lawfare of our own? And aren't there nonprofit groups that we can appeal to bring lawsuits at local and state levels to oppose the teaching of Islam in our schools over the teaching of Christianity?
Yes, we can. I'm going to teach you now one of the great differences between Muslims and us. I sat in a mosque in Southern California and watched in 5 minutes' time, $18,000 was raised for the purpose of lawfare. They were very clear about it. We want to use this money to sue people such as me. So, Muslims are very generous in fighting this war. They're commanded many times in the Quran to give money to the jihad. Now, jihad does not just mean killing people. Jihad means the struggle. If it's the struggle to Islamicize our schools is an act of jihad. So, we need to raise money to do this. I'm just saying that Muslims, when they need to raise money, they're gung-ho about it. So, the basic overall mental attitude of this, Muslims want to win and we want to top. We just want things to be nice. I do not know of organizations that can raise, that would. The problem with Islam is so big that it's hard to find some place for somebody who wants to do such a task, even if it needs to be done. So we're going to have to raise our own money, which of course we discovered we're not so good at raising money to oppose Islam. But if we loved our civilization as much as Muslims love theirs and want to win, if we wanted to win as much as they want to win, we could solve these questions. Yes, we do need lawsuits, but we have to have money to have lawsuits. That means more work.
Is the case not that the ACLU supports Islam on freedom of religion basis of the First Amendment rather than opposing Islam?
You're not going to get the ACLU to oppose Islam. The ACLU is basically run by leftists. When I was a long-haired hippie, I used to send money to the ACLU when I was in that phase of my life. I finally put it all together. So the ACLU is of no use to us. They don't care anything at all about freedom. They care a little about freedom of speech. And if it's freedom of speech that relates to some things, they may stand for freedom of speech. When it comes to Islam, they're silent. They're apologists for Islam.
I want to ask you a question about, don't you think it's very clever that they use women apologists and representatives of Islam wherever they station a center of community interfaith dialogue? It's a woman in a hijab and easy on the eyes with form-fitted jalebas or sort of an attractive, goofy nature to explain and defend Islam. That's no coincidence, is it? That they're not sending out their swarthy gentlemen, right? They're not sending out the guys who come from Cairo University, right?
Our opponents, the Muslims, are very clever and shrewd and tough. If we played the game half as well as they play it, we would win. I mean, let me give you an example of how tough they are. On September 11, 2001, they had the worst possible position to be in. 3 days after 9/11, they started calling the churches in Tennessee and in all across the nation. And they said to them, "My name is Ahmed, and we want to come to your church and give you a lecture, a seminar on Islam, the religion of peace." Now think of what they were able to do here. Launch a nationwide campaign 3 days after 9/11, and it worked. They used 9/11 to build the bridge building concept. So these men are shrewd and tough. I say the same thing over again. They want to win. We would like for them to just go away. We would just like for this to leave us alone. That's not going to happen. So we have one set. If you're in Team Islam in the locker room, you're going Allahu Akbar. You're all for war. But if you go to the Kafirs, what you find out in their locker room, you're like, well, what are we going to do? Listen to your questions tonight. What are we going to do? They always know that they're supposed to do something. They're very clear with their goal. The Quran commands them to dominate the world. And they take that very seriously, so that's what they try to do. They enjoy war because it's a way of triumphing. And we want to just be left alone. That doesn't work out. We're going to be left alone, but they're going to take care of our business. We should have been taking care of ourselves.
A friend of mine recently sent me the POTUS and Political Warfare memo from May 2017. It was by Rich Hitchens, who was working for... Yeah, I was wondering, because this just completely amazed me. And this memo was widely available online, and it's gradually the memo is being erased, and we had trouble finding it in our own email inboxes, both my friend and I. We finally resurrected it, but you've heard of it, and what does it mean? Because it touches on this very subject.
Rich Higgins is one of our best scholars on the subject of Islam, particularly in how it relates to the federal government. His work is excellent. There are other people such as Steve Coughlin who also work with him. I don't know how it disappears, but I can tell you this. Let me give you an example of disappearing on Google. Before the Southern Poverty Law Center was at a Media Matters meeting, a George Soros operation in Florida, I created the term political Islam. It used to be that if you Googled political Islam, I had the top 3 screens. That is, it was all about me. After this Media Matters meeting in Florida, 2/3 of my references went away. So Google no longer is fact-based. Google is also now biased. It's biased towards Islam. Because you see, the way their view of it, they see people such as you, me, as cruel, evil people, want to persecute an innocent minority. That's your view. That is, we're immoral and the Muslims are moral. So that's the bias that's now built into Google. So with regards to Rich Higgins' paper, I don't know where it went to or how much its Googleness is being suppressed, but it would not surprise me. Rich Higgins is one of our better men, like I say, particularly how Islam works in Washington, D.C.
When it comes to illegal immigration, there has been Muslims affiliated with that as well. What kind of threat might we get from Canada, the issue of Muslims in Canada?
When it rains, it storms. I tell you, the illegal immigration problem is a part of the Islamic problem, but it's also a problem separate unto itself. I don't have an answer for illegal immigration. I just told you that our Republican governor here in Tennessee wants to bring in more Muslims. Specifically, he wants Muslims, more Muslims. What do we do about that? We seem to have lost our way in so many ways. We're filled with doubts. What we thought would work doesn't work because, for instance, we would hope that, for instance, the FBI would do with jihadis. The FBI is very biased, pro-Islam. This all happened under Obama. Let me say this, under George Bush, Steve Coughlin, who was the only man at the Pentagon who truly understood his Sharia law, was fired under George Bush. So we see here that the Republicans, in many cases, are just as bad about dealing with Islam as the Democrats are. Now, the Republicans don't encourage it quite as much. Nevertheless, they don't want to do anything about it. I find that both parties, Republican and Democrat, are corrupt, which doesn't make me a lot of friends, but it's just the way I see it.
Have you heard also about, touching on immigration fraud, have you heard about how Ilhan Omar, it's not her real name, and we have a problem with immigration fraud and that family chain migration, where it turns out something like 80% aren't actually related to each other. So she changed her last name to get into the United States with another family, and she married her brother, and she was married to 2 men at the same time, and so on and so forth. Are you hearing some of that about Minnesota? Because we're really, filled with a lot of that.
Minnesota's kind of famous for this type of thing. Like I say, Minnesota's become the Sweden of the United States. It seems as though Minnesota can't do enough for Islam. Now, I don't really know that, but I'm just telling you what the general reputation is.
To add one more thing to that, have you heard about how Minnesota has Sharia banking and Sharia finance so that Islamists can obtain mortgages or student loans at special rates, and they pay a tax to Islam? It's Sharia compliant. They don't pay interest on it. Fargo Wells Bank was instrumental in instituting those. There's even real estate companies that have a Sharia law agent connected to the real estate company that pitches properties and handles Sharia mortgages for customers. Is that getting outside Minnesota at all?
Unfortunately, yes. I think all of your sins and are well known to the entire United States.
Good.
The thing in Minnesota is well known to us.
The Islamists are financing home purchases outside of the banks in Minnesota. I suppose that happens nationally. That can be a question. But lastly, for me, in the instance of Ilhan Omar Elmi, with all of her marriage problems, is there some way we can be using that to somehow discredit Islam?
I don't know if you can discredit Islam, but she certainly flawed you. It appears as though no one wants to hear this information. That is, they're perfectly willing to impeach Donald Trump, but they're not willing to look into the sins of the Muslims. I don't know what to do about that. By the way, oddly enough, if you have interest-free mortgages, it may sound like you're getting off cheap. The truth of the matter is, a Sharia mortgage costs the homeowner more than a regular mortgage. Unless the banks have just started giving them money, I don't know.
What's your thoughts on Keith Ellison?
I'm glad he's in Minnesota, not Tennessee.
Thanks a lot. We can send him down your way.
I don't really have any other comment. That was cruel, I'm sorry. You gotta find some humor in this stuff. Come on.
My question is how do we stop this taking the oath of office on the Quran versus the Bible?
I don't have a problem with his taking his oath on the Quran, not the Bible. But I do have a problem with the fact that you want to address the fact that what's in the Quran contradicts our Constitution. That's what bothers me. And no one wants to bring this up. In truth, based on facts alone, Muslims should never be elected to any office in the United States because every office that's a political office is based on the fact that you accept the Constitution as our basic rules of life. If Sharia violates the Constitution, so we need to use the fact that the Quran he uses as a method to attack him with, because in this book that he's just sworn his oath on, there's things it's okay to beat your wife, it's okay to rape women, it's okay for child marriage. We need to stand up for the fact that he has pledged to bring these things into our system of government, which I despise and hate. So we need to take this fact and use it to our advantage.
Could it not work that we rally to promote taking the oath of office on the Constitution rather than on the Bible or the Quran?
I think that's a good idea. Yep. Matter of fact, I like that idea a lot. That sounds good. I think it's the right direction to move in, because it definitely puts the contrast to what the Muslim believes and to what really is important. The Muslim does not believe that a woman should be free from beating. And by the way, that same Quran contains slavery within it as well. And it also contains cruel and unusual punishment. So I think we need to use the fact that they're using a Quran to point out to them what it is. But I like the idea of swearing an oath on the Constitution.
It would be taqiyya or kismet for an Islamist to take the oath of office on the Constitution, but there's nothing we can do about that.
Oh. They will lie, no question about it. But what we should do is to bring up what's in their faith that contradicts the Constitution. Look, I think that political office is one of the places. Here's a problem that I have, and people such as Hitchens and others have, is they won't give us a platform. That is, I'm shadow banned on Twitter, for instance. So what we need to do is we need to have a way that we can attack them, and one of the ways we need to attack them is in politics. We need to do this. We need to put together teams such that if a Muslim is running for office, every time they appear in public, we have signs, we have brochures, and we ask difficult questions. We want to make it such that they no longer want to come out into public. I say that people running for office, we can ask them any question we should do. We should be on the attack mode, not the defense mode. You never will win this war basically just being nice and just being nice. You need to be rude, you need to be loud. When I say rude, that's a difficult word to use, but I mean we need to be very firm and aggressive and say that this political system can be made to work to our advantage. But to do so, we need to teach each other how to work in teams so that people are not working alone. Anyway, I see politics is the future for defeating Islam.
Thank you.
Well, I feel the applause is perhaps overrated here. If you've noticed on most of the questions you've asked me, I can't give you a definitive answer. So I feel like I wish that I had an answer to all your questions. But thank you so much for caring. I understand in Minnesota it's snowing tonight and difficult to get out. So thank you for coming, and I appreciate your interest. Thank you so much for who you are and what you do. Thank you.
Thank you. You have a good night.